There are two Africas that often exist at the same time but never quite meet. One Africa is standing at the podium of the United Nations, asking the world to account for centuries of theft, trauma, and erased humanity. The other is standing at a police station desk being told that a meeting, whether public or private, requires permission. One speaks the language of justice, the other enforces the language of control. And somehow, both are happening in the same week, on the same continent, under the same sky. And to us, that means we need a second take. My name is Ashwin Betty. Welcome to the show. Tendai Biti was not arrested in a vacuum. He was arrested in the middle of a political moment defined by a proposed constitutional amendment number 3 bill that goes to the heart of Zimbabwe's democratic structure. Because this is not a technical adjustment, it is a reconfiguration of power itself, a proposal that would extend presidential terms and potentially allow President Emmerson Mnangagwa to remain in office, while also shifting the selection of the president away from a direct popular vote and into the hands of parliament, effectively moving power from the citizens to political structures. And Biti had been explicit in his opposition, not quietly, not cautiously, but directly, framing the amendment as a fundamental threat to constitutionalism, arguing that once you begin to redesign term limits to suit incumbents, you are no longer interpreting a constitution, you are negotiating with it. And that negotiation always benefits those already in power. And before his arrest, he had already been making this case publicly in Zimbabwe, not as rhetoric, but as warning, insisting that this was not reform but a turning point, a moment where Zimbabwe must decide whether its constitution remains a shield for citizens or becomes a tool for political longevity. Because when term limits become optional, they do not disappear loudly, they dissolve quietly, and what replaces them is not stability, but permanence, dressed as governance. Here's Zimbabwean lawyer and opposition leader Tendai Biti.
As you know, our government has gazetted Constitutional Amendment number 3 of 2026, which seeks to extend the term of office of the President and Parliament by a further 2 years to 2030. Elections are supposed to be held in 2028. They now want them to be held in 2030. The amendment also seeks to change the way we elect our president from a direct election of 17 million people to an election through parliament, 300 members of a parliament. The amendment also seeks to avoid a referendum. Our constitution is very clear that when you remove term limits, 2 referendums are required. I was in my office today when the police surrounded the SEM and besieged the SEM. This is the 3rd time that they've done that. They've also heavily assaulted a worker at that office called Pardon Chipangura. They've also attacked some of the clients that had come to see me.
And then again, he reinforces the argument, emphasizing that shifting presidential elections into parliament does more than change a process. It changes accountability itself. Because once leaders are chosen by structures instead of citizens, the distance between power and people expands. And that distance is where democracy begins to thin out, where representation becomes negotiation, and where political survival becomes more important than public consent. And these were not theoretical concerns. They were immediate, tied directly to a bill that critics have already labeled a constitutional coup. And yet, when the state responded, it did not respond to the substance of his argument. It responded to the setting, arresting Biti, Morgan Ngube, other CDF members, and a journalist under the Maintenance of Peace and Order Act, not for opposing the amendment, but for allegedly failing to notify authorities of a private meeting, turning a national constitutional debate into a procedural issue, shifting the focus from power to paperwork. Here is Tendai Biti expanding on the dangers of the amendment and erosion of the democratic process.
We will die for this constitution.
will be arrested for this constitution, will exercise the rights that are provided for in our favor in the constitution, in particular section 57 of the constitution, which allows us to demonstrate, to petition peacefully. Just like the function of the president and cabinet is to uphold the constitution, is to protect the constitution. When Mr. Mnangagwa and his cabinet sit to make these vicious amendments on the constitution, they are breaching the functions and obligations that they've been given in part 5 of the constitution of protecting the constitution and upholding the constitution. Therefore, their proposed amendment is treason. Their proposed amendments are breaching the constitution of Zimbabwe that they took and swore oaths to uphold.
And so Biti spends a weekend in detention, released on bail with conditions to report regularly, which introduces something subtle but deeply effective, a system where dissent is not banned. It is scheduled, monitored, and contained, because the objective is no longer to silence opposition entirely, but to manage its rhythm, to ensure that it exists, but never freely. And in that process, the amendment remains central. But the space to challenge it becomes increasingly controlled, increasingly conditional, and increasingly defined by the very power that it seeks to question. You're still with Second Take. We'll be back after the break.
Namibia is a land of movement, with waves that never stop reaching forward. Here, adventure is not something we search for. It is something we are born into. In every corner of this country, creativity rises, from artists, from athletes, from dreamers. And when the world comes to explore Namibia, they discover something extraordinary. Because when sport moves people, creativity moves ideas, and tourism moves the world toward us. Something powerful happens. A platform where movement meets imagination, where industries connect, where opportunity grows, where Namibia's next chapter begins. Welcome to the Creative Sport Tourism Expo. Exhibit, partner, experience. Creative sport tourism.
While Zimbabwe negotiates the future of its constitution, Africa steps onto the global stage to confront the past, and John Dramani Mahama of Ghana begins by calling for a resolution that would formally recognize the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a necessary correction to a world that has long benefited from the consequences of that crime, while hesitating to name it with the weight it deserves. And he builds this moment deliberately, securing African Union backing, aligning 54 nations behind a unified position, and presenting the resolution as both historical acknowledgement and moral clarity.
Fellow Africans, esteemed leaders, brothers and sisters of the African continent, it is with great honor that I address you today on the occasion of Africa Day 2025. As we gather in Addis Ababa and connect across our vast continent and beyond, we celebrate our resilience, our rich heritage, and our unwavering spirit. This year, our celebration is particularly significant. The African Union has declared 2025 as the year for justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. As the AU champion for this critical cause, I'm deeply committed to working with you all to achieve this vital objective. For too long, the legacy of slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism has cast a long shadow on the lives and progress of Africans and people of African descent. These historical injustices have left deep scars. Reparations are not merely about financial compensation, they are about acknowledging the profound and enduring damage inflicted upon our people. They're about confronting the uncomfortable truths of our past and taking concrete steps to rectify these wrongs. We seek justice, justice that encompasses a comprehensive range of measures, including official and unequivocal apologies from the nations and institutions responsible for perpetrating these historical injustices, addressing the crippling debt burden that continues to stifle economic growth in many African nations, a direct consequence of exploitation and unfair trade practices, providing resources and expertise to empower African nations to achieve sustainable development and participate fully in the global economy, returning stolen artifacts and cultural treasures that rightfully belong to our heritage, investing in the educational initiatives to promote a deeper understanding of African history, culture, and contributions to the world. This is not a simple task. It requires courage, determination, and a unified front. It requires us to engage in meaningful dialogue with those responsible and to advocate tirelessly for our rights. I call upon my colleague African leaders, civil society organizations and youth groups, and members of the diaspora to join hands in this important endeavor. Let us work together to build a future where justice prevails, where the wounds of the past are healed, and where the potential of every African and person of African descent is fully realized. Let Africa Day 2025 be a turning point. Let us reaffirm our commitment to building a continent of prosperity, opportunity, and equality for all our people. Let the pursuit of reparations be a testament to our resilience, our determination, and our unwavering belief in a brighter future. Happy Africa Day. Let us move together united in purpose towards a just and equitable future for all Africans and people of African descent.
But before the vote, he introduced a sharper layer, pointing out that even as Africa calls for recognition of history, there are active efforts to dilute or erase Black history in parts of the world, particularly in the United States, where the legacy of slavery is still being debated, revised, and in some cases deliberately softened. And in doing so, he connects the resolution to the present, arguing that acknowledgement is not just about what happened, but about whether the world is willing to remember it honestly.
Truth begins with language, with the power that words hold to shape consciousness and to shift perspectives to propel an action or other. There's no such thing as a slave. There were human beings who were trafficked and then enslaved by people who believed they could own those human beings as chattels, as their personal property. The entire transatlantic slave trade was designed to deny African people their humanity. And that denial was premised on a racial hierarchy with no basis in fact or science, a racial hierarchy that deemed whiteness superior and blackness inferior. So when discussing slavery and its resulting institutions and practices, we must always start by reclaiming racial equality, the dignity of Africans, the humanity of our ancestors who were enslaved, and as a matter of course, our own humanity. I speak these words today not only for Ghana, but also in solidarity with the rest of Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the wider diaspora, and indeed all people of good conscience throughout the world. This resolution is a pathway to healing and reparative justice. This resolution is a safeguard against forgetting. We stand united as Africans, whether on the continent or any part of the world, and link up with people of conscience around the world to seek truth and justice and restore the dignity and humanity of victims of the slave trade. This is a resolution of destiny. And I hope all of you will vote tomorrow to establish truth so that together we can pass this historic resolution and finally acknowledge the full horrors of these transgressions against humanity of the approximately 15 million human beings who were enslaved.
And then the vote arrives. 123 in favor. But the United States and Israel, alongside Argentina, vote against. And this is where the moment shifts from diplomatic to deeply revealing. Because the United States, a nation whose economic foundations were built in part on the labor of enslaved Africans, whose history still carries the unresolved weight of that system, chooses not to affirm that it was the gravest crime against humanity. And Israel, currently facing sustained international scrutiny and accusations of genocide in Gaza, also votes against a resolution defining one of history's most universally acknowledged atrocities. And what emerges is not just disagreement, but discomfort. A resistance not to the facts of history, but to the implications of fully naming them. Because to name something as the gravest crime is to open the door to questions of responsibility, of repair, of accountability. And that is where consensus begins to fracture. And yet, despite that resistance, the resolution passes. And Mahama stands again, this time not asking, but reflecting, framing the moment as one of dignity, of acknowledgement, of Africa asserting its voice in a world that has long narrated its past without it.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Your Excellency, Secretary General of the UN, Excellencies, permanent representatives, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Progress is made in little steps. It is the forward motion towards something better, and changes often come incrementally. Today marks the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. It is a day on which we honor the memory of the approximately 13 million African men, women, and children who were enslaved over the course of several centuries. We remember them through articles, oral histories, through broadcast programs, books, music, visits to museums, monuments, and memorials such as the Ark of Return, located right here at the Visitors Plaza of the United Nations headquarters. Through these activities, we do more than remember. We document and educate, we gain greater perspective, we find the delicate balance of learning from history so that we do not repeat it while leaving our pain behind. In doing so, we begin to heal individually within our immediate communities and also within the global community. This day of remembrance did not happen by accident. In 2006, our global community gathered here, just as we have done today, and resolved to designate the 25th of March of the following year a day of remembrance. It marked significant progress. Then the following year, in 2007, we decided to make the event an annual one so that the 25th March of every year would be the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. That marked an additional step in our forward motion. And so it's indeed fortuitous to be here today, 2 decades later, addressing the General Assembly on behalf of the African Group regarding the draft resolution entitled Declaration of the Trafficking of Enslaved Africans and Racialized Chattel Enslavement of Africans as the Gravest Crime Against Humanity. In September last year, at the 80th session of the General Assembly, I stood in this exact place and served notice that Ghana will move a motion to declare the transatlantic slave trade the gravest crime against humanity. This current draft resolution is a result of months of consultation and consensus building by continental bodies, nations, experts, scholars, and jurists, with the sole aim of achieving a united front and grounding the final outcome in truth, compassion, and moral conscience, remembrance, education, and dialogue. So today we come together in solemn solidarity to affirm truth and pursue a route to healing and reparative justice. The adoption of this resolution serves as a safeguard against forgetting. It also challenges the enduring scars of slavery. Madam President, let me conclude with two significant quotes by two great leaders of history, one of them white and one of them black. The former President of the United States of America, Theodore Roosevelt, said, and I quote, "With a great moral issue involved, neutrality does not serve righteousness. For to be neutral between right and wrong is to serve wrong." Again, civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King also reminds us, and I quote, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." We've traveled this long road, each step guided by a desire to be better and to do better, each step bringing us closer to the kind of world we would want to leave for our children. And so, delegates, on this beautiful day in March, we're called to stand on the right side of history. Let it be recorded that when history beckoned, we did what was right, for the memory of the millions who suffered the indignity of the slave trade and those who continue to suffer racial discrimination. Let our vote on this resolution restore their dignity and humanity. I thank you for the opportunity.
And in that chamber, the applause is not just for what was passed, but for what was finally said out loud, even if not everyone was willing to say it. Stay with Second Take. And here is where the discomfort settles, not loudly, but persistently. Because these two realities do not cancel each other out. They coexist uneasily, revealing a continent that can demand justice on the global stage while rationing it domestically, that can articulate the crimes of centuries past while navigating the contradictions of present power. Because the same Africa that says the world must acknowledge historical injustice must also confront how power behaves within its own borders, how laws are interpreted, how opposition is managed, how constitutions are amended, and how easily the language of order becomes the practice of control. And it is not hypocrisy in the simplistic sense. It is something more complex, a layered political reality where nations are both victims of history and authors of their present, where leaders can speak truth internationally while systems quietly adjust the terms of participation at home. And so Tendai Biti's arrest and Mahama's resolution are not unrelated stories simply because they occurred in different countries. They are reflections of the same continental tension, the push for dignity externally and the negotiation of power internally. And perhaps the real question is not which story defines Africa, but how long both can continue to exist without colliding. Because eventually, a continent that insists on justice abroad will have to decide how comfortable it is delaying it at home.
Each step bringing us closer to the kind of world we would want to leave for our children. And so, delegates, on this beautiful day in March, we're called to stand on the right side of history. Let it be recorded that when history beckoned, we did what was right for the memory of the millions who suffered the indignity of the slave trade and those who continue to suffer racial discrimination. Let our vote on this resolution restore their dignity and humanity.
Africa is no longer voiceless. That much is clear. It can command rooms, shape resolutions, and force the world to listen. But the harder conversation is not with the world, it is with itself. And until that conversation becomes as loud as the applause in New York, the story will remain unfinished, not because it lacks truth, but because it has yet to fully live it. My name is Ashwin Bedi, and that has been Second Take.